Hello, good morning. I'm Matt Addison, James Martin with me for today's preview of the game with Ajax later on today. If you've got any comments or questions, stick them into the comment section as we go. We'll get to as many of those as we can over the next few minutes. Team predictions, score predictions, whatever it is, we'll keep an eye and we'll get to those very shortly. But James, let's sort of start with a generic preview, I suppose. I suppose that the context for this game is what happened last week in Napoli. It wasn't a great performance. Certainly wasn't a great result from Liverpool. And I suppose there's a little bit of a pressure on Liverpool to get a win tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there would have been, regardless of whether a game had gone ahead at the weekend, given that, in the Champions League, we'd have still been 0 from 1 and going 0 from 2 really causes problems. But I think it's just been amplified by the fact that, like you say, that was very much the last game that Liverpool played was that horrific performance in Napoli, which Jurgen Klopp recently called the worst of his entire Liverpool tenure. I mean, that's pretty extreme. So, yeah, the onus on Liverpool now is certainly to bounce back, not only for the sake of sort of salvaging the group stage situation, but also just in terms of getting back on track, trying to get some much needed momentum.
Yeah, I suppose that's the key thing, isn't it? It's hard with the Wolves game, the Chelsea game next weekend is off. Liverpool have had a bit more of a rest, but they could almost have done with a game to get that out of the system a little bit quicker. I suppose they've had a little bit more time, and I think it was important as well that we know that the Chelsea game was off before this one happens, because that will come into sort of team selection, how long players are on the pitch for. There possibly would have been a few changes, maybe after an hour or so with Chelsea in mind, but Jurgen Klopp doesn't have to think about that anymore.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the rare times in the season where there'll be the best part of a week between games twice in a row now, with, like you say, with Chelsea off as well. So yeah, I suppose in that respect, it's good in the short term, especially as there will have been plenty of things to work on the training ground. It sounds a lot like there's been a bit of a dressing down this week, which isn't really necessarily always the Klopp way of doing things. You think of him more as a kind of calm presence. He'll explain what went wrong tactically, but you don't really associate him with the kind of the Roller Kings of old, if you like. But it sounds like the team haven't escaped that this week. Reading between the lines, it sounds like, I mean, when he comes out and says it is the worst performance of his tenure, it's a fairly safe bet that the players have had an earful. So yeah, definitely scope for a response, both in terms of the time off they've had, the time on the training pitch, and, like you say, the time to plan. And yeah, so if there's no response now, then that's when things get even more worrying, because yeah, I mean, Liverpool will pay for it later on in the season with these games having to be fitted in somewhere. But at least for the time being, it's actually quite a nice schedule for once.
Yeah, I think we kind of know what to expect from Liverpool, or certainly what we hope to see from Liverpool in terms of a response. But what about Ajax? What do you expect from them? I think for them, they'd almost look at it as a bit of an opportunity, really, the way that Liverpool are playing. You'd fancy yourself to come to Anfield and have probably more of a chance to get a positive result than possibly they would normally.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that, I think. I mean, Klopp said that Wolves would have been laughing looking at the Napoli game. They didn't get to play us in the end, so I guess that means Ajax are the ones laughing now. But hopefully Liverpool can prevent that being the reality. But yeah, certainly if there is a good time to come to Anfield to play Liverpool in the Champions League, then there is that time. Potentially no such time exists. And of course, Liverpool saw against Manchester United earlier in the season that sometimes on the back of a terrible result is the worst time to play a team, because they'll be looking to give a big response. They, of course, lost to Brentford 4-0 and then came and got a result against us. I mean, that says as much about our struggles this season as it does about Manchester United's brilliance. But yeah, it can go either way. Liverpool will be desperate to respond. But yeah, Ajax are an exciting team. They're not an ideal team for Liverpool to be facing right now, because they will test that space in behind. They will hit Liverpool with pace, with directness. That they have. I mean, they lost some players, but they have some very exciting players still as well. Kudus has been in exceptional form. They got Bergwijn off Spurs this summer, who's settled in really, really well. Um, I think Berghaus is there as well, formerly of Watford. He's another one who's very direct, very quick. So yeah, I mean, all sorts of the kind of threats that have been posing disproportionate problems to Liverpool this season. So yeah, it's going to be very hard to keep a clean sheet, and it's going to be quite hard to get any sort of result. Liverpool will need to be much better at both ends of the pitch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Kenneth Taylor, who the excellently named Dutch midfielder apparently is very, very good. Apparently, people see him in Ajax as being better than Ryan Gravenberch. So I think that'll be an interesting one to take a look at. But let's have a little bit of a talk about the Liverpool midfield. Kumar back in the comment section again. Good morning, Kumar. Midfield trio for today, James?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think Thiago has to come back. I think that's almost a given. He was very good against Napoli, the only player you can really say that about. He came on when the game was already gone, but he did at least turn the tide, prevented things getting any worse anyway. He won far more tackles than players who were on the pitch for far longer. He broke up the play. He did everything that the midfield was lacking for 60 minutes. He's essential. I mean, Liverpool can't pin all of their hopes on him because he did start against Fulham, which I still think was probably the next worst performance of the season before the Napoli one. So he's not going to come in and everything's going to be fine, but he's a big step in the right direction. And he's had time. He'll have benefited from the postponement of that Wolves game. So it's a more sort of gradual return to action, which is what Liverpool would want. So hopefully he can be managed appropriately, but I think he needs to start. Who plays with him? I think Fabinho, it's tricky because he has looked particularly fatigued. But again, I think the system hasn't done him any favours. The failures in front of him have meant he's been exposed far too often. So again, I think with the best part of a week between games, he'll have to come back in. And hopefully we'll look a lot more secure with Thiago in front of him. It's that third slot, which is really interesting, I suppose. There's a case for Artur. I've seen people, there you go, Kumar has suggested him as well. But I think for me, I'd just about stick with Elliott. But what I might do is flip Thiago and Elliott around. So you have Thiago giving Trent that little bit more protection he's been crying out for. And then Elliott can maybe have a bit more of that freer role down the left. I suppose with Robertson out, that picture might change again because does Tsimikas now need some more protection given that he's coming in, quite cold. But, Tsimikas is potentially the more defensive-minded of the fullbacks. When you look at sort of certainly between Trent and Tsimikas, you'd maybe trust Tsimikas a bit more in terms of how much will he get forward, how much will he stay back. So I think the balance might be a bit better with Elliott over on the left.
Yeah, it's certainly something to think about, isn't it? I mean, there's not many options in the midfield. I think Harvey Elliott could do with the rest. I think Artur did okay last week, but didn't look like he was anywhere close to being able to play even say an hour rate. Maybe if he was to start, he might get the first half, but then maybe you'd be struggling for the second half out of him as well. He's not played a great deal of football, and I suppose the only other option is James Milner, who has not been particularly great, and again, definitely needs a rest. He can't just keep playing. So yeah, be an interesting midfield three. Certainly, I think we probably can guess two of them for sure, but it's that third one, isn't it? Let's move on to the forward line, though. I know you've written something around Darwin Núñez, which I agree with in terms of him coming in and starting, but there's Diogo Jota there as well, Roberto Firmino. There is options, but is it a Diaz, Núñez and Salah front three, do you think, tonight?
I think it probably has to be. Again, the situation with the fixtures has probably made up Klopp's mind a little bit more. If it had been a case of Wolves had happened 2-3 days ago, then maybe you'd start thinking, okay, maybe Diaz plays there, Jota plays in the Champions League or vice versa. But I think there's very little doubt that is... Well, I mean, I suppose there's still a doubt on Núñez, but in terms of Diaz, he's been one of the best performers this season, probably the best performer. Salah, he hasn't had the best of campaigns so far, but, there's no real option on the right wing who you could say is anything close to as gifted as he is. He's bound to come good eventually. So I think those two are pretty nailed on when you're in a must-win game like this one has become. As we've seen Virendra say there, it really is kind of... I mean, do or die might be pushing it a bit because, 12 points, you probably still gets you out of the Champions League group stage, assuming that the worst happened and we lost this one as well. But it would be in a very poor situation if that were to happen. So, yeah, in terms of going full strength, I think Diaz and Salah are nailed on. And then, as you say, I've written about who we need through the middle. I think with the slightly more space in behind in the Champions League, the fact that Núñez thrived in the Champions League last season, it's exactly the kind of game where he can come in and really sort of kickstart things. Well, sort of re-kickstart things, I suppose, because the Community Shield and Fulham, he was exceptional, really, but that momentum's gone since the suspension. So if he comes back in, big performance tonight, I think that's really what's needed for everyone concerned.
Yeah, I think it's a competition that has done him well in the past, so hopefully that can be the case again for him. We'll finish, though, with a score prediction. It's an almost impossible one to predict, I think, this one, and you don't quite know what you're going to get from Liverpool. We don't quite know exactly what we're going to get from Ajax, but I don't know. I think both teams will score. I'm going to say that much at least. But James, a score prediction?
Yeah, I think we're thinking similarly, if I'm remembering rightly from the team selector that's going up shortly. But I went with 2-1 Liverpool. It's I very nearly went 2-2. I can't say I'm brimming with confidence, but I think the main thing for me is the fact that there will need to be a response. You can't put in a performance like that Napoli one and then be really poor again. I can't see anyone allowing that to happen. But then again, I don't think anyone could see anyone allowing that Napoli performance to happen in the first place. So yeah, there's no guarantees, but for me, the response and Anfield will just about be enough to get a fairly unconvincing 2-1 win.
Yeah, I think, as I say, both teams to score, probably it's going to be very, very tight, but hopefully it should be a decent game. I think Ajax will probably come out and play a bit, which would be probably to Liverpool's benefit as much as anything, certainly to the benefit of the game. But I think we'll leave it there. That'll do us for this morning. Loads more to come, of course, throughout the day and later on as the game happens. And in the immediate aftermath as well, we'll have the debrief, the post-match press conferences and all the rest of it across our YouTube channel. I'm hoping to get across to the UEFA Youth League this afternoon, so make sure you keep an eye out for the results in that one. Loads more to come then, but for now, that'll do us. See you later.